Hello and welcome everyone. It's great to see such an attendance, and it's a distinct honour to present to Distinguished Company of the 1745 Association. So this evening we're covering one of the series of talks, a new series of talks of the 45 in 45 minutes, which of course is an almost impossible task. Cover all of the 45. I think the best we can do is cover things in bite-sized chunks, or Jacobite-sized chunks, as we might say. And this evening, my own talk is going to focus on the Prince's Cairn, which Steve briefly introduced as, I believe, the first cairn erected by 1745 Association, and a very important one at that, marking, of course, the spot where Bonnie Prince Charlie left Scotland in 1746. But as we'll discover through this talk, hopefully we'll realise that the immediate land and this spot in itself, in fact, is much, much more linked in with significant events throughout 1745 and 1746. This is a very meaningful one for myself as well, because this is my stomping ground growing up in Moidart. And of course, growing up there, I did hear on occasion, the odd tales of the 45 and legends that still continued. And that's something I love doing still today, returning home and engaging with the local shonackies and such to learn the oral traditions that are still preserved. And I have learned, in fact, stories that have been passed down since the 45, never published anywhere and only preserved in oral tradition that way. So these traditions of the 45 still live and still exist in this area, in Lochaber and in Moidart. So, the Prince's Cairn. Let's look at where we're looking at, which in itself I have termed a land of legacy. So you'll see in the small map on the lower left there, the approximate location of Loch nan Uamh, where the Prince's Cairn is located. This is in the Moidart area of Lochaber, the larger region. And of course it was the Cameron chiefs that largely presided and fielded many of the Jacobites for the 45 from Achnacarry and from the Lochaber lands. But of course it was the Macdonald of Clanranald chief and the Clanranald men that were largely fielded from the Moidart area around here. So I grew up in Glen Uig, which is only 8 miles from Lochaber, so slightly south of this map. And we'll look at the land and what went on here in 45 and 46. Well, Loch nan Uamh. Uamh, of course, means cave, and it is the Loch of the Caves. And the point there is, can you see it's fairly far in to the loch, and it's situated conveniently close to the road as well, which follows pretty much where the old road itself was. And that would have been an ideal landing spot for getting immediate access to go east or west to local clachans and such. So we'll look first, we'll travel chronologically regarding significant events in this immediate area here. The Prince's Cairn is on the eastern side of the Rue Peninsula. And the Rue Peninsula extends out beyond the map there, you can see to the west. And below that, on the southern side of Loch nan Uamh, you have the Ardnish Peninsula, which Angus Macdonald has made a bit more famous recently through his series of books about Ardnish. Well, it was here that really it began with the arrival of the Prince, and it was on the 25th of July 1745, of course. He arrived on the ship, the Duteli. The Duteli being the survivor of the 2 ships that set sail, of course, with the Prince and arms and provisions. the other being the Elizabeth, which was engaged by a naval ship off the south coast of England, and they both pretty much tattered each other, and they both had to limp back to their respective ports, leaving the Duteli to travel north. And as Steve had mentioned earlier, it was first arrived in the Hebrides and arrived at Eriskay, and it was from there that it travelled to the mainland, arriving at Loch nan Uamh, where on the 25th of July 1745 conversations began. And it was here that the Prince met Angus MacDonald of Borrowdale, and the Prince and his retainers were under the initial guise of smugglers until the real cause was made apparent. And Angus MacDonald, of course, played a prominent part in the 45, and we'll hear a bit more of him later on as well. But here was where it all began. And you can see on the right hand side there, another arrow pointing out the location on the 29th of July 1745 in the captain's log of the Duteli, where it's referenced that they made anchor in a small bay called Loch Ilost, which of course is Loch Eilert. The description is even given quite a detailed way as to exactly the route they took up Loch Eilert, and they describe the three small islands that you can just see to the left of that broad blue arrow there, and they travelled to the east of those islands. And where I've put that arrow is where I believe they unloaded the arms, because it is the spot beside the islands that is where the road is the closest to, you could say. And we know that the arms that arrived on the Duteli were only half the arms that were intended for the cause, because of course half of them were lost when the Elizabeth had to limp back, and the captain of the Duteli made the decision to donate and gift, in fact, to the cause all of the swivel guns, all of the 24 iron swivel guns, which of course now presented something more of a logistical challenge. This was a significant amount of weight, which wasn't expected to be carried initially, so they would have had to find what they could in terms of carts to then get that equipment, get the arms moving to a safe place. And undoubtedly they would have hidden them at the time, because any red coat that would have seen a cartload of swivel guns, cannons, and muskets and swords, of course there would have been issues. So no doubt this would have been a covert operation, and we know they landed the arms in the hours of darkness as well, between the hours of midnight and 3 a.m. In fact, the arms were unloaded, I believe at this spot at Loch Eilert on the 29th of July. And here on the 26th of April 1746, I've taken a bit of artistic license with the caption here and saying over the sea to Skye, but of course he went over the sea to Benbecula first, and the Skye episode with Flora MacDonald followed afterwards. But of course, following Culloden, the Prince himself made his way through the Highlands and travelled back to Moidart, where of course it was trusted lands. You had the chiefs and you had the clansmen as well that had already proved they would fight and die for the Prince in the field without any questions. And so he knew it was his best recourse for seeking shelter anywhere he went that way. So he found himself back to Moidart, and it was over the sea to Benbecula, in fact. And I can read a little account from that day, where it was said Donald MacLeod procured a stout 8-oared boat, the property of a John MacDonald, son of Innes or Angus MacDonald of Borrowdale. And on the 26th of April, they went aboard at twilight on the very spot of ground where the Prince had landed at first. They were in the boat, the Prince, Captain O'Sullivan, Captain O'Neill, Alan Macdonald, commonly called Captain Macdonald of the family of Clanranald, and a clergyman of the Church of Rome, and Donald MacLeod for pilot managing the helm. There were also 8 boatmen, a fair size of wee boat, and they landed on Benbecula on the morning of April the 27th. And there we are. Well, the point that, sorry, just to reference the arrow which I've placed there, which is the furthest left on the map, is actually the location of what's known locally as the Prince's Cave. And it's here that I believe he sheltered during this time, during his retreat from Culloden. Because of course, when he arrived, he was under the guise of a smuggler, and it was all very secretive. His presence wasn't widely reported and known when he first arrived in 45. But of course, after Culloden, the Prince was target number 1 for all government troops to locate. And hiding out in caves, we know from the oral traditions, became part of his necessary journeys at that time. So I believe it's more than likely that the Prince's Cave at close to Arasig here got its name from him hiding out at this time. And this marking a rough area in Loch nan Uamh, but more than likely an area where they did anchor at some point. Between the 30th of April and the 3rd of May 1746, we had the French ships, the Mars and Bellone, arrive. And it was here they arrived with significant quantities of arms, with muskets, with swords, with powder, with ball, as well as gold and brandy for provisions as well. And they arrived on the 30th of April, and the arms were unloaded on the 2nd of May. So only a couple of weeks after Culloden, these ships are arriving. Of course, they didn't know when they set off and during their transit how things were to go. But the arms were unloaded on the 2nd. And then, of course, it all kicked off when HMS Greyhound and Baltimore and Terror arrived into Loch nan Uamh and engaged with the Mars and Bellone to fight the Battle of Loch nan Uamh on the 3rd of May. And it was on the 3rd, in fact, that they were moving the arms from the shore up to Borrowdale's house at the time. And so the arms were out overnight. They'd unloaded them on the 2nd, but they were moving them up on the 3rd. And in fact, the Jacobites that were moving the arms up from the shore were fired upon by one of the ships for a while as well. So this, for us, in terms of battlefield archaeology, is actually a site of interest. We've only recently secured permissions for the Roo and the Ardnish Peninsulas, and it's opened up all of these grounds really for what could be some quite exciting expeditions to come. And 19th September 1746, the Prince reports by letter, "I am arrived safe aboard the vessel." And it was from here that he departed the following day on the 20th of September. And the arrow there beside the point where he physically left the mainland is the location as to where the ships in fact anchored, and we'll provide evidence of that a little later on as well. And on the far left there, just of more recent interest as to finds in the area, on the 5th of September, only last year, 2020, the last time I was in the Highlands, in fact, dearly, dearly missing it, to be honest, we discovered the Sandig hoard, and that was the location of it there. Sandig was a little clachan, a little Jacobite community, certainly, and predominantly Clanranald men. And there are little pockets of clachans along the Rue Peninsula and several in Ardnish as well, and a few over Polnish area as well. And of course, being Clanranald lands, that would have been men fielded for the cause, soldiers for the cause, on the muster roll from here. And it was here the Sandig hoard was found. And it was quite a day. It was a glorious sunny day. And we had an idea that arms would be buried in the vicinity that were unloaded from the Mars and Bellone, because it was known in the area that government troops were closing in quickly. And we know there was a significant quantity of muskets and ball and swords and powder and such that had to be rapidly distributed. And we know this because there's also record at the time of arms being recovered by government troop after the Battle of Loch nan Uamh, where of course they engaged against the L'Hérault and Prince Conti, the two ships. French ships, of course, had to retreat, a fighting retreat really, and the Royal Navy assets then landed troops to search the local caves, because they knew there were local caves in the area, and it's our belief that they searched the most obvious ones that they could see and that they could find from local knowledge, and recovered 650 stands of arms in the local area there, which of course for us begged the question as to how many were loaded, and it appears a significant amount more. So there does appear to be quite a number of arms unanswered for, and this is forming a bit of a focus for us, hopefully for this year and forthcoming years. But it was quite a hoard. We found over 200 musket balls, with the calibers of them corresponding to the calibers of the French muskets that were landed, which were .69 caliber. Of course, a .69 caliber musket requires a slightly smaller, slightly undersized musket ball, to which these were perfect size for. And underneath the musket balls, in fact, we found a number of coins and copper alloy buttons as well. And the croft, which we found all these beside, was the largest croft in Sandig. And we also discovered that, in fact, it was here that Alistair McMeister Alistair was known to have lived. A little bit after the 45, of course, he lived out his later years there. And is there a connection with Alistair McMeister Alistair? Possibly. One of the buttons is dateable to later in the 18th century, but it is possible there's still a connection between Alistair. But it certainly appears that from the caliber of the balls and the location, that they tie in with the arms unloaded by the Mars and Bellone in 1746. And I say, for us, it's opened up a bit of an interesting can of worms for research. And I can confirm that we're actually on the trail currently of what has been to now a lost Jacobite cave that was only known to a few in the local area at the time. So we'll just see where that research takes us. So briefly document the rescue mission itself. Well, the successful rescue of the Prince, of course, wasn't the first attempt and only attempt. This was the 6th attempt made to bring the Prince back after he'd retreated from Culloden. So various efforts made, and significant costs involved, and equipment and assets and personnel with it. And the original plan for the 6th attempt from the French court was to secure 4 ships, 2 from Nantes and 2 from St Malo. And 2 were to sail up the west coast and 2 to sail up the east coast in search of the Prince, because at this time they'd received no specific reports as to his location. They had no idea where in Scotland he could have been. So it was anyone's guess from the French perspective at this time as to whether he fled perhaps to the east coast, away from the more obvious lands of Moidart and Lochaber, or whether he'd put his faith in the chiefs and in the clansmen to seek his refuge there, and of course out in the Western Isles, as we know. So with them believing it was anyone's guess at the time that the plan was to cover both bases and cover both the east and west coasts. But word was received from Nantes that in fact the two best assets there were still the Mars and Bellone, which were still undergoing repairs after the Battle of Loch nan Uamh, and still were not in a serviceable state to be deployed at that time. And so it was to St Malo that two ships were secured, Le Héros and the Prince Conti. Now, they set sail from St Malo, but in fact, they first went to the west of St Malo, and they went to Cap Frail, which is a peninsula in Brittany, just to the west of St Malo, and they anchored there for a short while for the Jacobite crew for each ship to arrive and embark there, to avoid them going through the busier port and area of St Malo. So every effort being made here was very much covert. There were coded letters and messages being sent back and forward to make arrangements here, and it was very much a secret mission in operation. Well, it was on the 20th of August 1746 that Le Héros and Le Prince Conti set sail. Le Héros was a ship of 34 guns and with 275 men under Captain Theroux de Beaulieu. And the Prince Conti was a ship of 30 guns, 225 men under Captain Marion Dufresne, only 22 years old at the time. Now, with Captain Beaulieu on Le Héros was Colonel Richard Augustus Warren. And Colonel Warren was heading up the mission. He was really in charge of what was going on. Lieutenant O'Brien, Irish soldier, was with him on Le Héros. And on Le Prince Conti, Captains Michael Sheridan and Captain Lynch were on those ships as well. Now, this was a mission headed up by Colonel Warren, who was an Irish soldier, a veteran of the Battle of Fontenoy early in 1745. And following that battle, or some months after, he travelled to Scotland to offer his services for the cause. And he arrived at Stonehaven, and there he assisted in the construction of batteries to repel warships. His character and his bearing was recognised by the Prince, and he was given the commission of Colonel. He found himself as aide-de-camp to Lord George Murray and fought at the Siege of Carlisle. So he was very much a seasoned military man, and no doubt the best choice to lead up this mission. And later in life, he became a brigadier in the French army as well. So it was quite a well-set mission. I'm sure that Colonel Warren had every idea of nothing but success coming off the back of it when they set off. When they did leave Brittany, they got a short distance north before they spotted some ships to the north of them, and one of them headed straight for them in pursuit. So they took a circuitous route heading southwest, and then under cover of darkness, getting more distance away from what they perceived to be an enemy ship. They then sailed fully around the west coast of Ireland before first arriving in the Hebrides, in the Western Isles. And so you can see where they arrived first on the map in the lower left in South Uist, and then they made their way from there over to Loch nan Uamh. Now, we're fortunate enough to have the original maps from that time and from that mission. And this is the map from Loch Boisdale as to where the ships arrived and where they anchored. And they arrived there on the 4th of September, 1746. They entered Loch Boisdale, and here they ran across the same Captain Macdonald of Clanranald's regiment, Alan Macdonald, who had been in the 8-oared boat in which the Prince had been rowed to Benbecula on the 26th of April. Macdonald came aboard and he served as pilot, and he then took the French across the Minch to Loch nan Uamh, and they anchored there disguised as British men of war between the 6th to the 19th of September. And this is their maritime map of the plan of Loch nan Uamh. Loch nan Uamh, as it's put down there on the map. Now, this shows the route they took in and exactly where they anchored, and it gives reference points for the best anchorage. And I'm very thankful to Thierry for providing a translation as to the text in the lower right of the map. It says the plan of this bay has been drawn after the report of Mrs. Therouard de Beaulieu and Marion du Fresnay commanding Le Heroux and Prince de Conti of St. Malo, that took Prince Charles Edward back from Scotland in October 1746. This bay, which is shown nowhere on any map until now, and on no section of maritime charts, is a very good shelter. The anchoring is secure, and it is possible to get water and wood easily. There is hazelnut wood, oak, and birch, the descendants of which grow there still to this day. And the ships landed here and anchored, and they were here from the 6th to the 19th of September. Part of the reason for that was to wait on the Prince, of course, arriving. And he received news, of course, from Cluny's Cage and made his way from there over and across by Loch Arkaig over to Moidart. And some gales actually blew up for the best part of that couple of week period, which Le Heroux and Prince Conti were actually quite glad of and thankful for, because it would really sort of deter any naval ships from being too active in the area during that time. And so the weather actually secured them in a way in Loch nan Uamh for that duration. And of course, received on the 19th and departing on the 20th. And depicted in one of the most enigmatic, I think, and poignant paintings, Lochaber No More, by John Blake Macdonald, painted in 1874. And this is an incredible painting. If you haven't visited it in Dundee Art Gallery and Museum, it's very much worth the visit, obviously, when travel restrictions allow. It's an incredible, I don't know the dimensions of the painting, but it's a huge painting. The size alone is impressive. And there's a very, very much an atmosphere to this painting that tells you of the feelings of the Prince leaving, and the depth of sorrow from the clansmen who would have been there and present to see him depart. And Lochaber and Moidart would have been slightly wetter for the tears that were shed that day for seeing the Prince leave in Loch nan Uamh. And of course, 1956, there was erected the Prince's Cairn by the 1745 Association as legacy to remember that spot where the Prince himself left. And there it says, the Cairn marks the traditional spot from which Prince Charles Edward Stuart embarked for France 20th of September 1746. And it is a great legacy that the 1745 Association has left by the construction and maintenance of this cairn for us today, of course, but for future generations that will visit it and will know something, at least of the history and the Prince's departure. So there we go, folks. I hope that's been a little window, a little insight into that wee brief moment in history and the land around it as well, of course, and the significant events and moments throughout 1745 and 46 associated with the campaigns and with the Prince most directly. It's been an honour and a pleasure to present this evening, and I thank you for your time.